Across the country, young men were being shot down in cold blood. The killer struck unexpectedly. His attacks were unprovoked. His sole motivation was racial hatred, and after he killed, he vanished. When a sniper in Utah started targeting African American men for death, authorities launched a massive investigation. With scant clues and no witnesses, they found the odds stacked against them. They had no idea where the killer would strike next. I am Marcus Langford, former head of the FBI's New York office. Civil rights violations fall under federal jurisdiction. So the killings became the FBI's business. The investigation soon grew into a nationwide manhunt for a roving serial killer. On a summer night in Salt Lake City, Utah, 4 youths walked through Liberty Park enjoying the last days of their summer. 20-year-old Tyler Vance and 18-year-old Derek Harper had just finished choir practice. Tara Ellison had just begun dating Derek a few weeks earlier and had set up her friend Kara Winslow with Tyler. This was their first date. The four had met to jog in the park but decided to walk and talk instead. They were too preoccupied with each other to notice a man watching them through the scope of his rifle. When Derek Harper dropped to his knees, the others thought he was joking. Then Tara felt something sting her arm, and she knew he was deadly serious. Tyler told the girls to take cover while he tried to help his friend. Then he too was shot down. Police and rescue units raced to the scene. Derek Harper, barely alive, was rushed to the hospital but died hours later with 3 gunshot wounds. Tyler Vance, the son of a police chaplain, was dead. Witnesses told police they heard shots coming from an abandoned building across the street. But no one saw the shots fired, and no one saw the gunman. Detectives spoke with Tara Ellison at the nearby trauma center where she was being treated for her wound. She was still badly shaken but told investigators what she could recall. When she and her friends reached the intersection, she thought she heard firecrackers. Derek crumpled and she felt a sting on her arm. She saw blood, then realized that Derek was seriously wounded. As she told her story, she recalled something that had happened a few minutes before the shooting. The group was almost hit by a car traveling the wrong way down a one-way street, but she could not identify the make, model, or license plate, and she never saw the driver. Salt Lake City Detective Harlan Brooks did not know why the youths were targeted. These were young boys. They had never been in trouble with the police. We did not have an outstanding motive. We did not know whether it was something related to the girls, whether something related to the boys, or just a case of mistaken identity. In the morning, police returned to the crime scene to conduct a more thorough search. In a field across from the park, police found tire tracks. Technicians photographed and measured them. Close to the tracks, police recovered 6 bullet casings. Witnesses said they had heard the gunfire coming from the abandoned building. Now detectives believe that what they heard were the echoes. The shooter had apparently hidden in the bushes, lying in wait for the 4 of them to walk into range. Police matched the casings to the bullets that killed the 2 young men. They sent the evidence to the FBI ballistics lab in Washington, D.C. to determine the type of gun the assassin used. That would take time. Investigators tried to find other leads to the killer's identity. They all started with the family members of the victims. In particular, Tara Ellison's father seemed like a possible suspect. Tucker Ellison led an outlaw biker gang and was upset that Tara was dating a black man. Detectives spent several days tracking him down. When they found him, he agreed to come in for questioning. Investigators were very thorough with him. He said he had been on a whitewater rafting trip and that friends could back up his story. Detectives were not convinced. They demanded Ellison take a polygraph test. He would pass, and his alibi was corroborated. Police had no more suspects. They returned to the Liberty Park crime scene to canvass the neighborhood. One resident, Gavin Spencer, told investigators he had seen something suspicious earlier that evening. A car had parked close to his home, and he went out to investigate. He saw a man packing or unpacking something in the trunk. Spencer asked what he was doing, but the stranger simply shut the trunk and drove away. Spencer did not see his face, but told investigators that he was a slender white man. He described the car as a Camaro with chrome mags. Detectives thought the information was promising since the car was parked close to where they had earlier found the tire tracks. 2 days after the murders, police seemed no closer to solving it. Press coverage intensified and community outrage escalated. We had never had a homicide like this in Salt Lake City. We had never had people just gunned down, especially young people gunned down in the middle of an intersection. The general public wanted to know about the killings. They wanted to know if they were race-related. With the possibility of civil rights violations, concern grew in the Justice Department. Assistant U.S. Attorney Elias Grant was brought in to monitor the case. Members of the black community were particularly concerned and were somewhat vocal about whether this was racially motivated. But at the time, there were no clear answers. FBI Special Agent Landon Pierce from the Salt Lake City office was assigned to assist local investigators. When I first heard about this case, I was incensed. It caused a great deal of concern among not just the black community, but all of the community in Salt Lake City. They felt that there was an assassin loose and it could happen again. As community pressure grew, test results from the FBI ballistics lab in Washington, D.C. offered investigators a fresh lead. Examiners determined that the weapon had been a 6-shot rifle, either a Marlin or Glenfield .30-30. After searching gun shops and classified ads for recent purchases, investigators assembled 150 weapons that matched the description. They tested each one. None had fired the bullets found at the scene. By now, it was likely that the assailant had fled the area and perhaps the state. So the FBI sent out nationwide teletypes to local and federal agencies describing details of the crime, including the weapon and shell casings. With still no suspects, a $50,000 reward was offered to promote the public's help. Calls flooded in. All were checked, none panned out. Most who came forward were after the money and had nothing solid to offer. But one showed a hint of promise. A young woman who claimed she might have met the killer. She identified herself as Misty, a part-time prostitute. She was reluctant to talk to police until Detective Brooks assured her she would not be charged if she came in for an interview. She was actually a struggling college student, and so she would go out 2 days a week and work on one of the streets that a lot of the prostitutes worked on. She told the detective about a man she had met sometime in the weeks surrounding the killings. Misty was walking down the street when a man in a Camaro pulled up and asked if she wanted to party. She had not planned on turning any tricks that day, so she said no. He said he would make it worth her while. She relented since she needed the money, and the man did not seem threatening. He spoke with a southern accent and introduced himself as Bill Harlan. He drove her to the Regal Inn Motel. In the room, Misty noticed that Harlan had weapons. She described 2 long guns that stood in the corner and 1 silver handgun. Harlan did not talk about them, and Misty was afraid to ask. She also said that the man had tattoos on both arms. On his left forearm was an American eagle, on the right the Grim Reaper. After their stay at the motel, Harlan offered to treat her to lunch, then drive her home. At an intersection on the way to the restaurant, he pulled out his handgun and said something she would never forget. He explained that he was a contract hitman for the Ku Klux Klan and said, "Do you want me to kill those niggers?" She said, "Put the gun away." She was very concerned about what he was going to do. He then said, "It's real easy. I've done work like this before. You just walk up, you shoot them, you walk on. Everybody's concerned with them falling. No one pays any attention to you." Misty was terrified, but was able to talk him out of killing the pedestrian. Afterward, Harlan dropped her at her apartment where he briefly met her roommate. Brooks wondered if Misty was reliable or just another false witness looking for the reward money. Even if her story was true, Harlan's role in the case was unclear. Did it have anything to do with the killing? Or was this just a bad guy that was blowing through town and trying to make this part-time hooker be impressed with his ability of being a hitman or something? If Misty could identify the long guns she saw in the motel room, her story would have more weight, especially if she identified them as either a Glenfield or Marlin rifle, which the FBI had determined to be the murder weapon. Misty told Brooks she did not know much about firearms and did not look at the weapons for very long. The detective insisted she try. But the guns she chose from the photos did not match either murder weapon. Misty's story seemed like another dead end. Despite his doubts, Brooks made an appointment for her and her roommate to come back and work with a police sketch artist. Meanwhile, investigators continued to pursue the hundreds of leads that poured in. Public pressure was mounting. The community feared that the sniper could strike again, and police did not know that he already had. In the weeks after the double murder of two young black men in Salt Lake City, the killer's identity remained unknown. Then the investigation took an unexpected turn. Local authorities received a response to the national telex sent by the FBI. Police in Cincinnati were investigating a similar unsolved double murder that happened several weeks earlier. On a late evening, 13-year-old Derek Brown and 14-year-old Darren Lane walked to the candy store close to their homes. They never saw the man watching them. Danger struck quickly. They did not have a chance. Officers talked to onlookers hoping someone had seen something, but no one had. Detective Michael Brooks of the Cincinnati Police recalls that the coroner provided investigators with their first clue. The coroner responded to the scene, and he had already performed a post-mortem examination on one of the young men and was able to tell the trajectory and the direction the shots were fired in. The coroner pointed them toward the train trestle 75 feet away. Police combed the trestle. Among the overgrowth, they recovered 4 spent rifle casings. Ballistics analysts determined that they were shot from a .44 Ruger carbine rifle. Months had passed since the double murder in Cincinnati, and detectives had no suspects. No one knew why someone would want to kill the teenagers. This was not the typical homicide when you have 2 children, 13 and 14 years old, that are shot sniper style with no clear motive. It obviously had the city and the neighborhood in an uproar. When Brooks heard about the Salt Lake City sniper, he invited the detectives to Cincinnati to compare the cases more closely. To Salt Lake City Detective Harlan Brooks, the connection was clear. Once we were made aware of this information, we were pretty much convinced that we were dealing with the same killer from back east. And this was actually our real first involvement with what is commonly now referred to as a traveling serial killer. This was a new concept to everybody, not just out in Salt Lake. It was a new concept anywhere in the country that killers would just travel across the country. While police from both states met in Cincinnati to search for answers, Detective Brooks in Salt Lake City followed up on the slim lead from the woman named Misty. She told him that she had spent time with a man named Bill Harlan at the Regal Inn Motel. He carried guns and drove a Camaro like one described by witnesses close to the crime scene. At the motel, Brooks found a registration card signed by Harlan. The address Harlan listed was in Kentucky. We had the FBI run the names through their entire database. They had nothing on that name. So we felt fairly confident that everything he had put on this registration slip was fraudulent. FBI labs in Washington, D.C. dusted the card for latent fingerprints, but found none. They also analyzed Harlan's handwriting and noted some unique characteristics that would make it easy to identify. They had no proof he was the killer, but he was the only lead they had. Although it was a long shot, a team of 20 detectives spread out to search other motels in the area. They carried copies of Harlan's Regal Inn registration card, hoping to match his handwriting in the event he used a different alias. Agent Pierce recalls the extensive search. They conducted a search of all motel rooms from Ogden, which is 30 miles north of Salt Lake, to Provo, which is 30 miles south. And they located about 8 motels where this individual had stayed using false names, each one different, using phony addresses and using false license numbers for his car. Local investigators also discovered the suspect stayed at the Scenic Motel on the day of the murders. It was just 9 blocks from the shootings in Liberty Park. Though Harlan used different names at each motel, the FBI labs confirmed the handwriting was the same. One of the cards yielded a fingerprint, but a check in the National Fingerprint Database turned up nothing. At the Sandman Motel, they got another break. Detectives discovered that his registration card listed a Camaro with its license plate number. But a second license number was written in the margin by the motel's owner. He must have been in his late 70s or early 80s. He went out every night around 3 in the morning and would take all of these motel registration slips and walk by all the cars and check their license plate numbers against what were put on the cards. because he was so sure that his guests were going to steal a pillow or pillowcase. When the owner checked the plates on Harlan's Camaro against his registration, the numbers did not match. So he recorded the correct Kentucky plates in the margin of the card. A DMV search revealed the license plates on the Camaro were registered to a member of a prominent Louisville, Kentucky family. The Salt Lake City detectives shared their discovery with detectives in Cincinnati. They immediately responded to Louisville and made contact with the police agency there and tracked down the actual registered owner of this car. He had in fact sold the car to another person some months before. The Louisville man showed detectives the sales receipt. Police took down the name of the purchaser, the car's mileage, and its brand of tires. But their troubles were not over. The purchaser had used a false name. The seller worked with a police sketch artist to render a composite of the buyer, a slender white man with a Kentucky accent. Back in Salt Lake City, Misty and her roommate were also providing detectives with a composite sketch of the man who called himself Bill Harlan. At the same time, I met with Misty and her roommate was actually an art student who was studying art, and she did a freehand drawing to begin with. And then we asked her if she could work with our composite, and she did, and she put together a composite of this man. When the composite drawing from Louisville arrived in Utah, detectives compared the two renderings. They were remarkably similar. Investigators now had the face of the suspected serial killer. Investigators hunted a serial killer who had murdered 2 young African Americans in Cincinnati and 2 more in Salt Lake City. They now had a sketch of their suspect, but lead detective Harlan Brooks still had no name and no hard evidence connecting him with the murders. We did not have anything to charge him with. However, we did find a motel that he stayed here in Salt Lake for 2 nights. Since he left without paying, we immediately applied for a warrant, which was granted, and we charged him with defrauding an innkeeper or failure to pay. We issued that warrant under every single name that had been found on every single motel registration card. The FBI entered the warrants, the license plate, and all of his aliases into the NCIC, the National Crime Information Center, a computer database that links over 57,000 law agencies nationwide. On a night more than a month after the Salt Lake City murders, the FBI database paid off. When officers in Boone County, Kentucky, arrived at a local motel to arrest a pair of jewelry thieves, the manager told them that one of his patrons was complaining about the lights and noise from their vehicles. 7 or 8 police cars in the parking lot with the red lights going and the radios blaring, and another person living in this motel took a fancy to being disturbed by all this noise and called the manager's office and said, "What are the cops doing there? And how come it's so noisy? And I'm going to leave if you don't quiet down." And so the manager went out and approached one of the Boone County officials and said, "My tenant is really upset that you're causing all this trouble." When the sergeant asked who was complaining, the night manager told them that the calls were coming from room 80. Perturbed, the sergeant ran the license plate of the Camaro registered for the man in that room. The computer check tied into the FBI database turned up the warrant from Utah. Boone County sheriffs went to room 80. A slender white male with a southern accent answered the door. Inside, officers saw 2 shotguns on the bed. They cuffed him and brought him in for questioning. This time the fugitive registered with his real name, Jonas Paul Harlan. They notified Salt Lake City investigators that they had their man. Detective Brooks and his colleague were on the next plane to Kentucky. But when they arrived, Boone County sheriffs had alarming news. The fugitive had escaped from his low-security room. At some time during the interview, the detective briefly leaves the room to get something to drink for the subject and himself, and it is at that point that this individual makes his escape out the window and is gone. Investigators still held his Camaro, his weapons, and wallet containing his driver's license and photo. Salt Lake City Detective Brooks recalled how closely the photo matched the 2 composites. Looking at that license, it was almost eerie. It almost looked like the composite that had been building in Kentucky and the composite that I built out here in Salt Lake, that we had done it using Jonas Paul Harlan's driver's license. The suspected serial killer was still 1 step ahead. The FBI issued a federal warrant for unlawful flight to avoid prosecution. Investigators hoped the resources of the FBI could stop the killer before he struck again. The fugitive's face and description flooded the media nationwide. Agent Pierce spearheaded the manhunt for the FBI. He was almost immediately put on the 10 most wanted list because of the notoriety and because of the seriousness of the crime. The fact that he was a suspect not only in this crime, but in the assassination of a number of black people all across the United States. These were cases that had not been solved. To make the 10 most wanted fugitives list, Harlan's file was reviewed among hundreds of others. Special agents at FBI headquarters decide the 10 most wanted based on a suspect's immediate danger to society, that the suspect will not stop killing until he is caught. News of the killer's escape brought a flurry of sightings, including one from a Kentucky teenager. He said a man had offered him $100 to take him across the river to a shopping mall in Cincinnati. Investigators swarmed the mall to interview anyone who thought they had seen him. They discovered the suspected serial killer had purchased new clothes and had his hair cut and dyed. Harlan had changed his appearance and still had a source of cash. Back in Kentucky, evidence technicians scoured the Camaro for clues. They took photos of its tires, hoping to match them with tread marks found near the crime scene in Salt Lake City. They matched. For Detective Brooks, it was a major breakthrough. The tires were sort of a new prototype that were only being released east of the Mississippi. So for tires to show in a dirt field in Salt Lake City, they would have had to have been purchased at that time east of the Mississippi. That placed that car with that man in our city. At the FBI ballistics lab in Washington, D.C., examiners analyzed the weapons Harlan had left behind. They hoped to determine that one of the guns was the murder weapon. He had 2 rifles and 2 handguns. The FBI was able to compare the ballistics of these weapons with the bullets that were recovered from the victims' bodies. These did not match. The FBI also searched the NCIC database for criminal records and outstanding warrants for Jonas Paul Harlan. They discovered that Harlan had legally changed his name. His birth name was Jonas Clayton Vaughn. The information allowed investigators to dig more deeply into his past. Jonas Paul Harlan, a suspected serial killer targeting African American men, had escaped from police in Kentucky and was still on the run. The FBI had determined that he changed his name from Jonas Clayton Vaughn. Agents and local detectives traced his history to his hometown in Birdtown, Alabama. They spoke with people who knew him. For Cincinnati detective Michael Brooks, a clearer picture of the fugitive started to emerge. Birdtown is described as basically one side of the track is black and the other side is white. And so there was a lot of racial tension in his upbringing. There was a lot of problems between whites and blacks in that area. His mother had relatives that had been in World War II on the side of Nazi Germany. Harlan at one point had said he had read Mein Kampf and was very impressed with this writing. Jonas Paul Harlan had selected his new name to honor one of his heroes, Hitler's chief propagandist Paul Joseph Goebbels. The FBI tracked his movements over the previous year and found that they coincided with several unsolved bank robberies. Agents also learned that 2 years earlier he had sent a letter threatening to kill President Jimmy Carter because of his pro-civil rights views. The president was currently campaigning in the South, where Harlan had last been spotted. The election was just weeks away. If Harlan was going to make good on his threat, it would be soon. Detective Brooks remembers that the FBI and Secret Service rushed into action. Well, they decided that Jonas Paul Harlan, also Jonas Clayton Vaughn, was definitely a threat to President Carter because he had written that he would like to kill him. So they passed pictures of Jonas Paul Harlan in every city that the president was going to visit. The FBI had to get to Harlan before Harlan got to the president. We were able to, through contacting his friends, determine that during the process of his flight, he was selling his blood plasma to obtain money to live on. And as a result of that, we sent bulletins out to all of the blood plasma centers in the southeastern part of the United States. Clinics across the South received packets from the FBI with information on the killer, now suspected of murder in at least 7 states. On a day in late October, Harlan entered a clinic in the Tampa area to sell his plasma. The technician prepping him recognized the tattoos from the FBI packet, the Grim Reaper and the American Eagle. Harlan figured selling his blood was safer than robbery for a man on the run. He was wrong. The technician phoned the number the FBI provided. Federal agents surrounded the clinic and moved in to arrest Harlan. This time there would be no mistakes. He went without a fight. Harlan was taken to Salt Lake City to stand trial for the murders of Tyler Vance and Derek Harper. But Detective Brooks suddenly found the entire homicide case in jeopardy. The county attorney did not feel that we had a strong enough case. It was purely circumstantial as far as he was concerned, and he was not willing to go to court on just a purely circumstantial case. But the federal government through the FBI decided to step in at that time, and they felt that they had a very good, strong case to bring civil rights violations against him. The civil rights conviction would present obstacles of its own. Prosecutors would have to prove not only that he had committed the homicides in Utah, but that he was motivated out of racial hatred. The FBI held suspected serial killer Jonas Paul Harlan in Salt Lake City, while federal prosecutors built a case to prove his murders were racially motivated. Agents re-interviewed his associates, family, and 2 ex-wives in order to get a clearer picture of Harlan's racial beliefs. Agent Pierce sent his team to Harlan's hometown of Birdtown, Alabama. We were able to go back and meet with people that knew him, and we were able to develop a history of him, if you will, as to what he was like. The fact that he had been associated with the Ku Klux Klan. He had been associated with the American Nazi Party. The fact that he had been arrested a number of times for disorderly conduct, and in some instances because he possessed a weapon. Prosecutors pursued witnesses who could testify to Harlan's whereabouts and his racist views. At one motel, a manager agreed to speak at trial about his encounter with Harlan. The police had found a motel where he had stayed before the shooting took place, and he had gone and registered in the office, and then he went to the room, pulled down the covers, and found a black hair in the bed. This upset him greatly, and so he became irate, went back to the office and yelled and screamed, and made a number of racial statements against black people. Wherever they went, investigators found witnesses who remembered Harlan's car. Assistant U.S. Attorney Elias Grant recalls that Harlan's Camaro proved crucial to his case. The car that Mr. Harlan was driving was unique. It had a unique color, it had red pinstriping that was a custom kind of striping. It also had unique interior features and non-standard tires and other features that were noticeable to various witnesses who had observed the car in the Salt Lake area. The team also interviewed 2 young women who had ridden in Harlan's Camaro. We came up with 2 girls, a lady by the name of Sabrina and another one by the name of Rachel, who actually at 4 o'clock, 4:30, 4:45 on the day of the killing, were hitchhiking a couple of blocks away from the park. This man in the Camaro picked them up, and they needed to get to the downtown bank to deposit their paycheck before it closed at 5. As they got in the car, Harlan asked them if black people hung out in the park. One of the girls, who was dating a black man, said yes. Before he dropped them off, he handed them printed cards that said, "Take off your clothes." Brooks sent the cards to the FBI lab, and examiners were able to conclusively match them to similar cards found in the glove compartment of Harlan's Camaro. The timing of the women's story was also compelling. They actually saw him again that night, a block and a half away from the park at 8:30. So little by little, we were putting him almost in the park at the same time the victims were. At the Salt Lake County Jail, Harlan was held in a double lockup since he had previously escaped from police custody. While there, he became friendly with Ronald Herrera, an inmate serving time for burglary. Herrera had more recently been disciplined for brawling with a black inmate. Although the fight was not racially motivated, Harlan assumed Herrera held the same hatred of African Americans. He looked to Herrera as a confidant. Agent Pierce recalls the importance of this relationship. He told Herrera. He confessed to Herrera that he had shot the 2 joggers in Salt Lake City, and also confessed to a homicide in Oklahoma City. Herrera arranged a meeting with the FBI and local investigators. He had a proposition for them. Herrera would become a federal witness against Harlan if the state would guarantee his early release. Harlan told Herrera why he shot the couples in Liberty Park. He said he believed people of different races should never mix. When Harlan saw the black men walking with white girls in the park, he felt they should die. Investigators were not convinced they could trust Herrera. A confession to a convict would not ensure a successful prosecution. When investigators requested more information, Herrera told them about Harlan's whereabouts following the Salt Lake City murders. "Well, I can tell you what he did after the shootings. He did the shootings, he left here, he went north to a town north of Salt Lake, Ogden. He took the freeway across Nevada through Winnemucca, Battle Mountain, Reno, and into San Francisco. And he sold the rifle that he killed the kids at a flea market outside of the Bay Area." Agents and local investigators needed to confirm Herrera's story. If they could find the rifle Harlan had used in Liberty Park, investigators would have the piece they were missing. Detective Brooks sent his team to the flea market outside San Francisco. They interviewed gun dealers and other witnesses. So they saturated the flea market, and they did come up with witnesses who remembered Jonas Paul Harlan and remembered that he was selling guns. But we could never find the gun. Even without the weapon, Herrera's story was confirmed. Harlan's movements following the murders would be critical for the prosecution. Well, this was pretty good information because we had never been able, the FBI ourselves, no one had ever been able to find out where Mr. Harlan had gone after doing the killing. After agents corroborated his story, they met with Herrera again. He told investigators about other crimes Harlan confessed to. Harlan admitted shooting Hustler publisher Larry Flynt, crippling him in 1977 for portraying black men with white women in his magazine. Harlan also said he shot Vernon Jordan, the president of the National Urban League, in May of 1980. Federal prosecutors felt they had enough to bring the civil rights case to trial. Well, the prosecution was an involved prosecution involving 65 witnesses and approximately 100 different exhibits. However, we managed to expedite the case and move things along in telling our story and recreating the actions and things that took place. The trial lasted several days, and we were done. The jury deliberated for several hours, finding Jonas Paul Harlan guilty of the federal civil rights violations. The judge sentenced him to 2 life terms. Harlan was furious that he was going to prison for the rest of his life, but more so because an African-American prosecutor helped put him there. In a rage, Harlan jumped out of his chair and threw water on the attorney. He was quickly subdued by the marshals and carted away. In an interview following his sentencing, Harlan finally admitted to investigators what motivated the killings in Utah and across the country. He said himself that he is a racist, that he had a plan to assassinate as many blacks as he could. This was his whole purpose. After the successful federal trial, the Salt Lake County prosecutor felt he could win a state homicide case against Harlan. Harlan was escorted to the courthouse where he had spent the last 2 months during the federal trial. During a recess, he was left unattended in a holding room. Before the court officer returned, he freed himself and pried the door off its hinges. Harlan had escaped. No one knew how he had escaped from the holding cell, but when the jailers went to bring him back into court before the jury came in, he was not in the conference room. It looked as if Jonas Paul Harlan was free once again to continue his path of terror. The elevator was his only way out and only operable with a guard's key, but a marshal found the control panel dismantled. Harlan had hot-wired it using only a dime and a paperclip. He was able to take the plate off the elevator, the prisoner elevator, and strip the wires and call the elevator to that floor, and then he disappeared. Police closed off the streets as jailers searched the courthouse for the fugitive. The rest of us, we immediately put out an area-wide alert that this man had escaped, and we brought every available officer there. There was scouring the downtown area. At the same time, the jailer decided that maybe he noticed that the top panel on the elevator had been loosened. So he climbed up on top of the elevator and noticed some movement in the dust and thought, well, somehow he is in this building. So that particular jailer started crawling every single air duct in the courthouse. He found him. Harlan scurried like a rat in the ductwork, always remaining out of his reach. But when Harlan came to the end of the duct, a second guard was waiting. He was back in custody within an hour. We cleaned him off and combed his hair and brought him back in. And the jury was none the wiser, they just got an extra hour for lunch. Over the following years in prison, Harlan confessed to 16 murders in 8 states. In all that time, he never admitted to the double homicide in Cincinnati. Detective Michael Brooks never gave up. He continued to build his case, hoping to convict Harlan of the Cincinnati murders. Brooks's break came when he was able to convince Harlan to interview with Rachel Powers, an assistant district attorney from Cincinnati. The minute that Mr. Harlan walked in the room and sat down, and Miss Powers introduced herself, told him who she was, why she was there, he said, "You know, I did it. I killed those 2 kids in Cincinnati." Immediately as he sat down, which was what I had been trying to get him to do for some years, he did in a matter of about 30 seconds. In 1998, Harlan received 2 more life sentences for the Cincinnati murders. In Missouri, he was sentenced to death for 2 others. Harlan would never have another opportunity to escape. Detective Harlan Brooks remained haunted by Harlan's rampage of violence. I do not understand this type of killer, that he would actually just take a complete stranger and because of their race and who they were standing by or talking to, he would feel it necessary to kill them. He is one of those few people that I just have absolutely no explanation for, and it is still hard for me to understand. For the families of Harlan's victims, peace had finally come. Harlan would never be free to kill again.